It is a Friday. And the other day somebody mentioned and said, Steve, you mentioned your bicycle in this video. I just happened to have watched another of your videos where you mentioned a bicycle. What are the odds that you mentioned a bicycle 2 videos in a row and you told the same story about the cop interaction? Which is kind of funny because I've not told that story that many times. But if you were to click my videos randomly, it could happen. And so that story involved the Stingray, the first bicycle I had as a little kid. And I'm guessing, I don't know, third grade, fourth grade, got a little Stingray bicycle and used to ride it around the neighborhood quite a bit. Didn't go that far on it, probably. No, probably no more than half mile or a mile from my house. But where we lived, you could do a half mile or a mile quite easily without going over any major roads. So that wasn't that bad. But I learned how to do things like, fix flat tires and put chains back on and things like that, and had a few bad accidents in it. At one time I was riding along as fast as I could, trying to get home, standing up and pedaling, and the chain came off. And I just slammed into the ground like you wouldn't believe. And I came home and I walked in the door and I've got both my arms are all scraped up. I hit the gravel. It was an asphalt road, but they would gravel it once a year. And anyway, I was all cut up. It was pretty bad. But I had that bike, and that's the one I told the story about where I was with my friends and a police officer in a police car, pulled over to the curb and motioned for us to come over. And he started lecturing us about whether we had licenses on our bikes, which weren't required by law, but were recommended. But the way he treated it left me and my friends feeling like we'd been, I don't know, it was a really bad interaction for a young person to have with a police officer. And I've mentioned that that's the kind of thing that will stick with you, because here I am talking about it more than 50 years later. And I can tell you where we were, who was with me, where we were going, where we were coming. It stuck with me. And it was a very unfortunate incident, but it involved that bicycle. But interestingly, after I got rid of that bike, my older brother, Rick, sold me or traded me a bike he had. And it was a Schwinn Stingray, not one of the Apple Crate, Lemon Peel, or not one of those. It didn't have a suspension or anything, but it did have the 5-speed stick shift on the top tube. Big old stick shift, right where most guys look at it and go, okay, be very careful. That stick shift is right there. But it had a derailleur in the back, and so it had 5 speeds. And so I could get that thing moving. And I actually used that when I had my paper route that was the furthest from my house. I got saddlebags for it, and would be able to zip down there pretty quickly. And on a nice day, I get, no snow, no rain, throw that thing in 5th gear and stand up, man, and that thing would cruise. And then with my paper route money, I saved up my money and I bought a Raleigh Grand Prix 10-speed bike. I'm guessing in the early to mid 70s. I don't know the exact year, but I haven't a price stuck in my head. And I did some research to see if the price made sense, and it does. I paid $149 for the bike. I bought it from a bike shop in Berkeley, Michigan. And there was a bike shop in Birmingham, about a half a mile from my house, called the Birmingham Bike Shop. It's not there anymore. But I used to be able to buy stuff for my bikes there. But I bought the Raleigh Grand Prix because a friend of mine had one, and I liked it so much, I went and bought one of my, my own that I saved up my money for. And I remember when I actually got this bike, and it was brand new, and I remember riding it home for the first time, going, this is so cool. And when you're a little kid, I'm talking about junior high, a bicycle back then, it was freedom. It was freedom. I mean, I rode that thing everywhere. I had a friend who worked at a state park, and I actually just Google mapped it because I was never quite sure how far it was, but 14 miles away from my house. And I would hop on my bike, bring a Frisbee, and I usually, I didn't have like a rack or anything on the bike, so I whatever I carried, I had to carry with me. I bring a Frisbee and bike over 14 miles to get to this park, hang out there, and then bike home. And you might say 28 miles on a bike, that's no big deal. No, but when you're in junior high, it's pretty cool, And I remember riding this bike everywhere. And I had friends from school who didn't live near me go ride over to their houses. And I covered a lot of ground with that bicycle. I remember, I don't know how many miles I drove it. It didn't have a speedometer or an odometer on it. But I rode that bike all over the place. And it wasn't until I bought a car when I was in high school that the bike finally got relegated to the back seat, so to speak, figuratively speaking. It was no longer my first choice for transportation. I still rode it from time to time, but not much. And in fact, I actually lent it to somebody, and this is kind of sad. I lent it to somebody who had it for a while and then apparently forgot that it was mine and gave it away. And I'd forgotten all about it. And one of my brothers asked me, said, Steve, whatever happened to your Raleigh Grand Prix? And I said, oh, I lent it to somebody. They said, oh, you should get it back. It's kind of a cool bike, you know? And I contacted the person. I said, oh, I thought you gave it to me. I said, no, I lent it to you. I didn't give it to you. I lent it to you. And they said, well, how about if I pay you for it? So they paid me some money. So it turns out that I didn't lose much when I lost that bike. I still, if you said, Steve, can I, if I can get you that bike today, would you take? Oh, I'd love to have it. It's a dark green Raleigh Grand Prix, back when Raleighs, I believe, were still built in England. It had the shifters on the down tube, not up on the handlebars, like the American bikes. And it was a cool bike, and I covered a lot of ground with it. But one of the things I did on that bike, which is pretty cool, is that there was a group of people from my school who did things in the summertime, and they would do these bike trips. And so the organizers would get a van, and we'd all drive up someplace, and then we'd ride our bikes from point to point along a course. And so a couple 100 miles over 4 or 5 days. And, we actually put the flags on our bikes and wore helmets and on the side of the road. And this van would go back and forth, make sure everyone was okay if you broke down or something. But a lot of fun, just cruising along. And we actually had great weather on that trip. I remember it vividly, and we'd camp at, in tents at night. And then the second trip went up the other coast of Michigan, and it started someplace near Ludington, maybe, up the Mackinac City area and then back down. And then the third trip was on the Door Peninsula in Wisconsin. We took the ferry across Lake Michigan and then went up the Door Peninsula and then rode up one side and down the other. And I remember vividly going through the town of Frog Station, Wisconsin, which is about as big as it sounds. And unfortunately, on that trip, we had some bad weather. And I remember the day that we had to do the last leg that would get us to the ferry was raining bad, riding in the rain. And I didn't have proper rain gear. I'm probably wearing shorts and a T-shirt, which was my uniform from about 7th grade through 12th grade. But did the 3 bike trips. One of those bike trips, on one of them, one day we did more than 60 miles in one day, which is a decent amount for a high school kid. Now, nowadays, I know people go out and knock off 100 in a day and they think nothing of it. My brothers do that. But I'm talking about when I was a little kid, just on a 10-speed bike with a bunch of my friends goofing off. But that was a lot of fun. And then, of course, the bikes kind of fell by the wayside when I got cars. And then when I got out of law school, I actually had a 10-speed bike that one of my brothers gave me, a Moto Bacane, and it was a road bike. But I didn't ride it a whole lot. I rode it a little bit. But I had some friends then who got into mountain biking. And they said, Steve, you got to get a mountain bike. So I got a mountain bike. And the cool thing, of course, is that like the first mountain bike I got did not have a suspension. It was a fairly cool mountain bike, but it was just an all-purpose, rugged, heavy-duty mountain bike. And I've now owned, I think, 4 or 5 mountain bikes. And I have a thing for Haro. Haro, Haro, is a bike company. And they make a lot of BMX bikes, but they make very, very rugged frames. And I when I'm riding a mountain bike off-road, can be kind of rough on the mountain bike because I weigh a certain amount. And also, I would often ride them places where the terrain was quite rough. So sadly, I've busted up a bunch of wheels. I've actually cracked the frame on a mountain bike. I've done all kinds of stuff, but right now, I've got a Haro, which is full suspension, front and back. It's got disc brakes, front and back. And it actually cost more than my first 3 cars combined. Now, you have to understand inflation is a big part of that. But my first car, famously, I've told the story before, it cost me $300. And my most recent mountain bike cost a lot more than that. But I think if you were to do the math on what $300 in 1979 was, and fast forward that to today, I suspect that that'd be more than what my mountain bike cost. But it's just remarkable. But that's the interesting thing about getting older is that you can buy better toys. And if you'd said to me, Steve, do you understand that somewhere down the road, talk to me when I'm riding my Stingray, my single-speed Stingray with the coaster brake. You said, hey, Steve, somewhere down the road, you're going to be riding a mountain bike. Don't worry about what that means, but it's a bigger bicycle, and it's going to probably weigh less than the bike you're on right now. And it's going to have push-button shifters, disc brakes, and a full suspension, and you'll be able to ride it on extremely rough terrain, and if you really wanted to, through a river, for instance, that's like a foot deep. Just ride it through there. You'll be able to do that. I would have been like, cool, I can't wait to grow up. But I'm not sure how many bikes that is, because there's 2 Stingrays, the Raleigh, the Motobacane, the first Haro, the Mongoose, the second Haro, the third Haro. So I'm guessing I've owned 8 bicycles in my life, and I currently have 1. I've actually got 2, but one's taken apart. But I've got one that I ride. So those are my bicycles, and I do wonder, and I hate to be the old man in the room here, but I'm the only one here, so I'm also the youngest man in the room. But I don't see kids on bicycles. I don't. And then I realized I don't see kids outdoors anymore either. I think kids are all indoors playing video games. And I mean, I remember the feeling of freedom I had when I first got a bicycle, just my first bicycle, being able to ride around the neighborhood. Then when I got the 10-speed and I could ride, like I said, 14 miles out and 14 miles back from a state park that was actually like a few towns over. And then having a mountain bike, which I throw in my car and I take someplace and I go out and I do like a 17-mile loop around Potawatomi. But like I said, I don't see a lot of young folk on bikes anymore. And I don't know if bicycles are just not that popular, or maybe I'm just not in the right areas to see them. But it's unusual because I think people of our generation, I'm hoping you're of my generation, not insulted by that, but people of our generation look back more fondly on things like our bicycles. And, interestingly, I used my bicycle to do my paper route when I could. In the wintertime, I couldn't if it was snowing or something, but I used it quite a bit. And the bicycle, I think, back then meant a lot more than the bicycle does today. So I just had that thought occurred to me after seeing those comments about the bicycle. That was my purple Stingray that started that. But then I had, like I said, the 5-speed, and then the Raleigh, and then a bunch of other bikes after that. And I've got a bicycle today. So there you go. Questions or comments? Put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.